the closure of Hormuz is the single greatest disruption to the oil market that even eclipses the 1973 oil embargo. So I fear that the markets are in denial a little bit, which is actually not surprising. I've devoted most of my professional life to research on market trends, and usually these large-scale price events tend to unfold over months and years, not overnight.
Monaco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. Well, I have a guest that I wanted to get on because we are on day 19 of the Iran war. It's March 18th, and it's Alex Krainer. Alex, welcome to the channel.
Thank you for the invite, Mario. Always good to be with you.
Yeah, nice to be with you too. And Alex is a geopolitical economics market analyst. He ran a hedge fund. He traded oil as well. And Alex, we were speaking just before we started recording that things are so crazy, it's difficult to know what's going on. But today there are some interesting developments. I saw that India has gotten a tanker through the Strait of Hormuz and they paid in yuan. They got it through safely. I think yesterday or the day before, Pakistan did the same. But at the same time, we see that the I guess you want to call it a coalition, U.S., Iran, or Israel, excuse me, they bombed a gas facility in Iran, and now Iran is threatening Saudi Arabia. So things are getting really crazy. I see, Alex, that the Brent crude right now, the spot price is around 106. It's probably a lot higher. I mean, I'm hearing that it's more like 140 if you want to buy the real thing. So the first question I have for you, Alex, is what are the economic consequences of this war? And I know it keeps changing, but maybe you can clarify or give us your best view on that.
I think it would be very hard to judge the fallout from day 19 of this war because I believe that the consequences will be accruing for months, if not years. Um, so Brent crude oil is trading at 106, 107, whatever it is. Um, I fear that it'll go much higher because if we look at the longer term chart of crude oil, this price isn't even terribly exceptional. We were already at $120 a barrel in 2022, so nearly 4 years ago, and we were at 140 in 2008, if I'm not mistaken, or 2007. So, and that was without war in the Middle East, and the closure of Hormuz is the single greatest disruption to the oil market that even eclipses the 1973 oil embargo. So I fear that the markets are in denial a little bit, which is actually not surprising. I've devoted most of my professional life to research on market trends, and usually these large-scale price events tend to unfold over months and years, not overnight. So what we had almost overnight was the initial jolt. So, I mean, you are old enough to remember that back in December of 2025, Brent crude oil was trading at 60, not even low 60s, 60. WTI was below. It was at the five handle. And today we are nearly double that. Well, we're not quite double that, but it's getting there. So that's in less than 3 months' time. So in terms of market histories, this is almost an overnight thing. But we have to remember that it was in 2022 that JP Morgan was predicting $380 crude oil. And that was not even taking into account the war in the Middle East. It was based on Russia sanctions. That didn't happen, but that doesn't mean that it might not happen now. Obviously, it's not going to be tomorrow. It could be a year, 5 years from now, but the consequences will unfold over a longer period of time. And then, if we go back to 2012, there was a British Ministry of Defense research report published, which predicted that by 2040, which is now, 14 years away, that the barrel of crude oil will go to $500. And these are people who look at history in its long cycle. They took into account the disintegration of the global order, scramble for oil resources. This was one of their, themes that they were researching, and we see that happening. It's not by accident that, in January, Trump moved on Venezuela, and that was, a small thing that he went to the Middle East, made a nice friendly overture to the Gulf kingdoms last year. Now this move on Iran, this does have a whiff of scramble for oil resources. But then on the other hand, things that people didn't know in 2012 was where alternative energy sources would go. And we know now that the United States, but also Russia and China, are making very significant advances in nuclear power generation, which, at the moment we don't know where that goes, but it's, especially innovations coming from China, they could be massive game changers. And so we saw that recently Huawei patented battery technology that can give a car 3,000 kilometer autonomy with a battery that charges in 5 minutes. So, planes and tractors and trucks and locomotives will run on oil, but, demand could depreciate significantly if these innovations become widespread over the coming years. So for that reason, making long-term predictions is always a thankless task. But also, beyond oil, we have to take into account things like natural gas, which is one of the most important feedstocks for the production of nitrogen fertilizers. 1/3 of it comes through the Gulf of Hormuz. So, we might actually have famine issues. This is the much more worrisome aspect. And I think that the Western world is much more vulnerable than the global South, because our leaders have been busy destroying our agricultural production for years now. There's been a war on farmers, and you can see it. I live in Monaco, so, basically under the French system. And one of the things that I've always appreciated about France is that it probably has the world's best food merchandising industry. I lived in many countries, and nothing rivals France. You could walk into any supermarket any day, and you'd find a fantastic variety of fresh quality produce at any point in time. So that was more or less taken for granted. But since the pandemic, so let's say over the last 5 years, it's visibly declined. So I think that the quality cuts of meat, there's less than half of it available now versus what we had 5 years ago. Junk foods and processed foods, no problem, it's as good as ever. But good quality farm produce is becoming scarce. And then, not to mention the prices, the ballpark, they've doubled since 5 years ago. So, at some point, we start having all sorts of problems, not just expensive energy. We might have food shortages. We might have shortages of everything, in fact. And we shouldn't we shouldn't feel immune to this because it's been experienced by many countries when their systems disintegrate. The problem is that, you know, the way we the way we regard risk in general is that it moves us only if we've experienced a certain type of risk in the recent time, in the recent memory, and if it had an emotional impact on us. If it's abstract or remote, people just kind of don't even move. They don't necessarily acknowledge it even. I mean, that's just how we're wired. That's basically the way it is. You know, if you live in a volcanic area and there hasn't been much volcanic activity in many years, people just start building neighborhoods in known volcanic flow areas, thinking like, okay, you know, what's the worst that can happen? And these, you know, I'm talking about concrete things that have happened, like in Hawaii, you know, there on the Kona Island, there hasn't been any volcanic activity for about 30 years. People built entire neighborhoods in known lava flow areas. And then in 2018, one of the volcanoes erupted, and then all those neighborhoods got wiped out. But this is a, you know, if I look out the street here, life goes on as normal. Nobody seems terribly worried, but it's something very disruptive is coming our way. It might not happen from one day to the next, but gradually the pressure is going to increase. And I think at that point, it's very possible that it goes to social uprisings, to revolutions, civil wars, and things like that. I think as far as European Union is concerned, probably Britain in a similar way is in a similar position too. We might get some combination of German Weimar Republic and the collapse of the Soviet Union.
So before we proceed further with the interview, I just want to give a shout out to Dirty Man Safe. So with traditional safes, their so-called advantage is that criminals can't break into them. But Dirty Man Safe is different. Its advantage is that it's undetectable, so they can't even try to break into it. And that's only one of the many features of Dirty Man Safe. They provide 3 different sizes, and you can bury your gold coins, silver coins, bars, important documents, jewelry, and anything that's valuable for you. So yeah, Dirty Man Safe is affordable, convenient, provides you peace of mind, confidentiality, and sustainability. So if you want to find out more, there's a link below in the description. It will take you to a landing page. And if you use that link, you get 10% off if you were to decide to buy a Dirty Man Safe. And they ship it to Europe as well, not just the United States. Yeah, and you spoke recently on another channel about this. I'll bring it up here. This event, it was like an avalanche in this family. Let me,
Oh yes,
this one here.
that video is amazing.
So they're just watching it. You know, that's like what you said about risk, right?
Correct, yes. This is absolutely amazing, and this is an older video. You know, it's not new, so it's not, you know, if it were new, you might think, oh no, this is a, what do you call it, an AI generated thing, but it's not. This must be a few years old, maybe 10 years old. I remember it, and I find it extremely disturbing especially behavior of this of the father of this family,
Yeah,
who
because
says, "Oh, they have it. It's fine. They have it under control. It's a
it seemed really far away, the avalanche. I looked at it as well and thought there's no problem. It's just going to go underneath. But the other thing, Alex, is like today as we're watching the markets, as I watch the markets here, I see that the Dow is down like 400 points almost, S&P down 30, Nasdaq 100 down about 100. Even gold is and silver have taken a big hit, and it reminds me. I don't know if you remember that Banda Aceh tsunami, like I don't know how many years ago that was, over 10 years now. And before the tsunami came, the tide went out on the beach and it looked like it was really weird. And you'd say, "Oh, the tide's gone out. Let's go and uh, get some stuff from the beach." But if you hadn't like run away up into the higher ground, you would have been buried, by the
yes,
tsunami. And it seems to me now that the markets, yeah, they're really complacent and yeah, especially like with gold. I don't know who's selling paper gold and paper silver, but it seems to me if you stay in the markets in stocks and bonds, you're going to be wiped out by this tsunami that's coming. And I had a look, Alex, at what gold and silver did in 1973. That was when they had the oil embargo that was started in October till March 1974. And actually, gold and silver in the beginning didn't do much. They actually went down for the first month or 6 weeks. It was only afterwards that it started going up. And also the price of oil before the embargo, it used to be around $3 and it was didn't change much. It was a little bit like the $60 we've been having. And then it went to 12 and then we never saw $3 again or $12. Maybe back in the 80s or 90s, I think it traded down to 10. But like you said, I think we're in a new paradigm and I think people are not prepared for this. So, uh, how do you see this evolving in terms of for the US, for the dollar, for Western Europe? Do you see, like me, that we're gonna have almost we could have hyperinflation? This could be the trigger. I don't know if you know
yes.
about the history of the Weimar hyperinflation. I think in the end of 2022, beginning of 2023, the French occupied the Ruhr Valley, which was Germany's industrial powerhouse. And the Germans went on strike and stopped producing everything, but they kept paying the workers, and that really triggered the hyperinflation. It feels to me that this current crisis could be the Ruhr Valley, trigger.
Yeah, it's entirely possible, and I'm glad you brought up gold and silver during the 1970s because there also we had an initial jolt, which was almost as though nothing was happening. You know, people were out to lunch, watching the avalanche head their way. But the large scale price event spanned 10 years almost. It peaked in 1980, right? And so that's as far as gold and silver is concerned. So I think that we had that inflection point. I think that the Iran war will prove to have been the catalyst, but all the changes that are coming our way are nearly impossible to predict. But I will venture one broad brush prediction because I've looked at many of these cases, and it's symptomatic for the way monetary authorities manage crisis. So what they do is they just flood the system with liquidity because otherwise it grinds down to a halt. And the effect of that is basically that you will have much of this liquidity flowing into equities markets people at some point lose, you get inflation, and you rightly said it could become a hyperinflation. People lose confidence in the currency, but the currency keeps being generated and flooded into the system. So as people try to get rid of the currency as quickly as they can, they look to buy real assets. So a lot of it tends to flow to equities markets. So what you get basically is, I would say, three predictable developments: that the currencies collapse, that bond prices collapse. Basically, if we look at the Weimar Republic, the German imperial bond went to pretty much zero, although again, this process spent 20 years. And then you have equity markets that go vertical. And that doesn't mean that they might not correct 50% this year, but over the longer stretch of time, they will tend to be in a bull market. The problem is that basically the collapse of the currency's purchasing power outstrips the appreciation of the gold of the equity markets by orders of magnitude, by like a tenfold. So investors end up wiped out anyway. Even though the stock markets nominally grow, in the end, you end up exchanging this for worthless paper, and then a lot of the companies do go bankrupt. So depending on what you're invested in, it's not a good hedge. The good hedges are gold and silver, farmland, and then that's pretty much it. I hear a lot of people talk about real estate, thinking that if you buy real estate, that's a way to protect your wealth. It isn't, because when the purchasing power in the whole system craters, you might be sitting on some nice real estate, but nobody will be willing to buy it from you, or nobody will be able to buy it from you. And so, in Weimar Republic, the result was that in 1923 in Berlin, you could buy like a nice six-bedroom villa in nice neighborhoods of Berlin for $100. That's how desperate people were to have good money. And back at the time, dollar was still gold back, so it was worth not like $100 today, but still that was incredibly low. And as far as equities are concerned, I remember that at the end of the hyperinflation, the whole of the Daimler-Benz company was selling for the market cap, which was equivalent to the selling price of 327 of their cars, which is incredible, because I would bet that they must have had that many cars on their production lot and in their dealerships around Germany. So basically, it means that the company was worthless. For those who managed to preserve some purchasing power through the crisis, that could be good news, because at the end of that cycle, there's going to be a buyer's market for things of value. But getting there is going to be tricky, and there aren't very many good hedges. I mean, exposure to commodity prices, gold, silver. I don't even know what to think about Bitcoin at this stage. It could be a good hedge, but who knows? Since it depends on the internet functioning correctly and on the authorities not being able to confiscate stuff, which is not a given at this point. We don't know. So we'll find
Yeah,
out.
yeah. The Berlin example you gave is equivalent of 4.83 ounces today of gold for that villa, because
Okay. Yeah.
$100 divided by $20.67. Yeah, and what do you say to some people who they're like deflationists, and by deflation they don't mean the shrinking of the money supply. they mean prices going down, and they think that the current crisis, this war is going to lead to demand destruction, and that prices are going to go down, and that bond yields are going to go back to zero. I mean, I don't see that happening. Uh, Today, as we speak, we've got the Fed deciding on rates, and people are just a second. And Alex, as we speak today, we got the Fed coming out with its interest rate decision. I don't think that they're going to do anything, but some people are saying now that they're going to might even raise rates because they see the higher oil and gas prices creating inflation. I personally look at inflation as the growth of the money supply resulting in higher prices, but everything is so upside down now that people now see the Fed raising rates. But if they raise rates, it's really going to create a lot of problems. So, what's your view on this deflationist narrative, and also your view on what the Fed's going to be doing?
I couldn't predict what the Fed will do, because the both, they're both arguments are valid. I couldn't predict what they consider to be more urgent. Is it inflation or is it the economic slowdown? Because we have to remember also that the United States GDP was recently revised lower by about half, from 1.4% to 0.7% GDP growth. And so that's painful, which would probably encourage them to lower the interest rates. But then you're right, the commodity side, commodity inflation might be explosive, so that might have to push them towards raising rates. We'll find out. Maybe they'll do nothing. Maybe they'll just leave it as it is to avoid further uncertainty and how do you call it? Um, causing panic in the markets. Um, what was I'm sorry, I blanked out on the second part of the question.
Yeah, I think it about the deflationists, whether
Oh
you
yeah, the
believe,
deflation.
bond rates are going to go back to zero, and yeah, the economy there's going to be demand destruction. But we had this in the 70s. It was called stagflation, but people don't seem to learn that you can have an economic slowdown, and and you could still see the currency go down in value.
Yeah, I don't. Yes, you're right. I agree with you. I don't buy much into that deflationist scenario, because it would be absolutely devastating for the economy. Deflation reliably kills the economy because it's it can cause a self-stoking um, slowdown cycle of slowdowns that could go straight to depression. It is a way to deleverage the financial system, but while taking the inflationary route is it's politically more palatable, and it gives the government and the monetary authorities, it gives them time, to finagle, to kick the can down the road. If you go the deflationary route, then you start, unemployment, bankruptcies, all of those things start going up, and significantly so. And so then you get social uprisings, you get shut down, you get shortages of all kinds of everything. So that I think that it would be very, very difficult for any government to pursue that and to sell it to their constituents and to say that's the way it has to be, and then still be voted into office the next time. So generally, they don't like that. They like to increase the money supply, to take on more debt, and to spend, to pretend that they can spend their way out of the crisis. And if we look at the track record of governments dealing with these exact problems, I think it's, with the exception of Great Britain, it's almost 100% track record that they all go with money printing and inflation.
Yeah, I think yesterday Japan announced a stimulus package. I think
Yeah,
$135 billion.
unbelievable. It's this, like if you said this to somebody a year ago, they would think you're completely insane. But they went out and did it. And it, in a way, it shouldn't be surprising because you're always facing a choice of flooding liquidity into the system to keep, you know, to keep the jobs, to keep people going to work, producing stuff. And like there's a real aspect to this, you want your farmers out in the fields. You want your bakers making bread. You want your grocers selling food. If you go the route of austerity and deflation, you might find yourself that there's no food. Nobody plants anything. Nobody, factories shut down. Uh, the tax base goes down way below the government budget, and so you haven't really done anything. And the only way, the system ends up stabilizing when it reaches the point that the system only produces the bare necessities of life. So it stabilizes at the depression level of activity, and it's very, very hard to um, reignite growth from that. That depressionary level can stay cemented almost for years, if not decades. So
Yeah,
it's a very, very difficult road to take.
but also on the other side, though, if you keep stimulating and printing, people, you might also stop seeing people producing stuff because if the currency becomes worth less and less, it's almost the same coin as deflation, but it's the other side of the coin. So that's the danger as well, isn't it? And as for the Fed, I didn't really mean what they'll do today, but in general, going forward, do you think they're really going to raise rates? I just saw the national debt today went up to 39 trillion, first time. If we see a recession and we see private credit come off, you could see things slow down really fast, and then maybe they will keep rates as they are, but they might start doing QE. Is that what you think they could?
Yeah, a lot. Like, yeah. I think they're gonna go with easing for sure, because I think that part of their thinking is also that, hey, look how far Japan got with QE. They're at what, like close to 400% debt to GDP, and the United States is at I don't know what it is now, 115, 120%. They like to cite, oh, it's almost 100%, but it's way more than that. But
Yeah,
nevertheless, they could kick the can down that road quite a lot farther. Only I don't, American circumstances are very, very different from Japanese, because the Japanese has a relatively more closed capital market, in the sense that Japanese people tend to invest in Japanese pension fund, which they tend to invest in Japanese government bonds and Japanese equities and so forth. So the capital remains at home, whereas in the United States, it's not the same, and the local, let's say, domestic investors are not as shut, as closed in to domestic capital markets. So, there's also a risk of flight capital, which then means that at some point you get capital controls as well. Um, I'm convinced that they're going to go with QE, thinking that they have ways to go. But in the short term, the part that worries me is, I think that the people who are in charge of the banking system and the Federal Reserve, they want to be rid of Trump. So particularly in the particularly heading into midterm elections in November this year, they might want to create a recession in the United States and blame everything on Trump, which at this point it will be easy. But yeah, you see, now I just convinced myself that maybe they will be raising interest rates.
Well, I guess Powell. I think this is his last meeting deciding. I think he's there until the middle of June, middle of May, I think. But I wanted to ask you about this war. Um, how long you think it's a two-part question, I guess. How long do you think it's going to keep going? And well, according to Trump, it's finished 10 times, but it seems to still, the Iranians still seem to have missiles. But the other thing is, do you think by starting this war with Iran, with Israel against Iran, the U.S. is actually shot itself in the foot? And do you see the U.S. being like kind of evicted from the Middle East by the Gulf cooperation countries because the U.S. is supposed to defend them in return for them buying, treasuries and selling their oil in dollars? Do you think that's a potential thing that could happen? Yeah, the U.S. Being, yeah, kicked out of the Middle East. I think that's possible.
Yeah, I think it's not only possible, I think it's likely. And up until maybe just a few days before Trump launched the attack, I was convinced that he wouldn't do it. I was convinced that he wouldn't do it because it seems so staggeringly dumb as a thing to do. They thought like nobody's that dumb, nobody's that dumb. It just can't be. And one of the reasons why I thought so is because I thought that Iran could not be defeated militarily, and that if they strike at Iran again, that Iran would go all out because Iran has no interest in allowing the status quo to come back, because under that status quo, they were being perpetually harassed for the past 120 years since the beginning of the 20th century by colonial powers of Europe, particularly Britain and the United States. And it's been war, invasions, occupations, proxy wars, Iran-Iraq war that was Saddam Hussein on behalf of the CIA and the United States that launched the war against Iran. And then, constant propping up of the MEK to conduct sabotage and terrorist attacks inside Iran, constant threat of regime change, constant maximum pressure economic sanctions that are suffocating the Iranian economy and keeping the country, unable to develop to its full economic potential, and on and on and on. So it's been Iran has suffered for a very, very long time. And then, another part of it is that, if a regime feels under siege, then they have no choice. If they want to preserve themselves, they have to be repressive in the sense that, if your country is crawling with Mossad and MI6 and CIA assets who are busily organizing to destabilize and overthrow your system, well, then you have to keep very vigilant, which means that your government is repressive. And I think it's become unbearable for the Iranians. And now that this war has been imposed on them, it's not going to be a short-term affair unless the West capitulates. And that too is possible, because right now, one of the desperate gambits considered by the American defense establishment is to try to seize the Karg Island and to hold it, because apparently, 90% of Iranian oil exports are go from Karg Island. And so they thought like, okay, so if we take that, then we will basically force the Iranians to open the Strait of Hormuz if they want to get their island back. but Iran has been preparing for this for 23 years, as though they don't know that they're vulnerable to that, as though they haven't war gamed it and prepared for the eventuality of somebody trying to take the Karg Island from them. But nevertheless, the United States is now, as we speak, sailing a new aircraft carrier group with 2,500 Marines who are being prepared to take Karg Island. Ultimately, it's going to be commander in chief who decides to go, to pull the trigger on that mission. But if they do, I think it's going to be the end. They're going to end up with a sunk ship with thousands of sailors and Marines lost. And already as it is, I have some friends close to the U.S. military circles, and they told me that the losses that they have sustained in Iraq are at the very least in the hundreds, possibly in the thousands.
In
And
Iran, you mean, or
no, in Iraq,
oh, in Iraq, right now in Iraq.
Yes,
Oh yeah,
yes.
because
Over,
they're
over the recent days, that they
yeah,
were
yeah.
being pounded really, really hard,
Oh yeah, yeah.
and they basically, they couldn't respond. They couldn't. They can't defend themselves. They're surrounded. They have no logistical support. They're cut off in these bases, and they're just being pounded like sitting ducks. Um, and so will I can't imagine that Trump doesn't know this. And if that is the case, then who is going to dare another misadventure like seizing Karg Island from the Iranians? Anyway, to cut the long story short, I think that Iran has all the cards because they are very well prepared. They're very, very well armed. Um, and then, if somebody thinks like, oh, we have the greatest military in the world, yeah, but it's spread out thinly across the whole world. And B, they couldn't subdue the Taliban in Afghanistan after 20 years of trying. And part of Iran's preparations were include the possibility of the central government in Tehran falling. Even if that happens, Iranian military continues to fight, and they have, I think, 21 or 31, I forget the number, of uh, military districts which are practically autonomous. So if they lose contact with the central command, they carry on independently. So that doesn't stop. You can even take down the government in Tehran. You're going to end up kicked out as they did by the Taliban. And then just last year they tried to subdue the Ansar Allah in Yemen, which is not even remotely as powerful as Iran, and they failed. Trump started bombing them like nobody's ever seen before. In fact, that was almost a month ago. That was Operation Rough Rider that was launched on 15th March 2025, and Trump was boasting about bombing them like nobody's ever seen before. And
Is that the Houthis, you mean?
yeah, the Houthis,
The
yeah.
Houthis, yeah.
And what happened? They lost. They had to cut a deal in order for the Houthis not to bomb them anymore and to let them navigate through the Red Sea. And Iran is orders of magnitude more powerful than either the Taliban or the Houthis. Uh, they have a country that's the size of Western Europe, that has 92 plus million population, very cohesive society, strongly in support of their government. Even people who were not so strongly in support of their government before the 28th February, they are now. And so in the end, the United States already lost. The question is, do they accept defeat or do they keep doubling down? I think in either case, they end up evicted from the region. Most of their bases have already been turned to rubble, and it's not going to be possible for them to rebuild them easily. And now Iran is in position to say, okay, you want to sail through Hormuz, fine, but you have to pay for your cargo in Chinese yuan. And we see already that's happening. Um, I think the effect of this is that all of these Gulf kingdoms uh, must now see the writing of the wall, that their old-time ally can no longer protect them, that their money in Federal Reserve accounts is not safe and they might never see it again, and that if they want to live, if they want to continue as going concerns, they're going to have to make nice with Iran and with China and with Russia. And I think that means the end of Israel and eviction of British and American military bases from the Middle East. And I see no reason why the Iranians should compromise on that even a little bit, because if you give them an inch, in another 10, 20 years, you'll be right back where you started. So I expect that they will be extremely, extremely tough and that they will go all the way.
You mentioned in one of your recent interviews, you talked about, our fiat currency debt-based system, how it creates war and misery. And then you said that we could be on the cusp of the collapse of the 500-year, like Western centric global order. Uh, so if you could like summarize what that means, and then to wrap up, also talk about, because I don't want to be all negative about the West, but you also said that sometimes, bad events in history can blow open a path to good things. So if we could look at the how this monetary system we've had has led to war and misery, how we could see the end of the West, and which could actually be a good thing.
Um, Excellent question, Mario. How many hours we have? Well, basically, in if you read history, one of the amazing things about the Western civilization is that I think it has been uniquely pathogenic in the world, because we have not only destroyed six great indigenous civilizations around the world in the last 500 years, beginning with the Mayas, the Incas, the Aztecas, and then we pretty much destroyed the Indian, Chinese, and Japanese civilizations. And then we depopulated huge swathes of the world, almost completely. In many cases, 90, 95%, in some cases, 100%, like whole people are completely gone where they exist. Cuba and Jamaica and Haiti had Native American populations that lived there, and they've been completely replaced with African slaves, because that's what the process of colonization entailed. And so this same process has been reproduced all over the world, and it's happening still today. And why is that the case? Is it because other civilizations were nicer and we are not nice? I don't mean civilizations, I mean people. Are the Chinese nice because they didn't colonize, or are the Russians nice because they colonized in a very different way? And we are evil. It's not in the people. It's in the system. And so the reason this was the case is because we have this fraudulent monetary system that is stable only while it grows. And so those who control the monetary system, they have to make sure that their system, because it's a Ponzi scheme, so it's stable only so long as it grows, and it grows by issuing loans, by issuing debt. But to issue debt, you need collateral, right? So you need to always attract collateral into the system so that you can keep, it's like a malignancy. But then, it comes to a point where any any economic system becomes saturated with debt anymore. Uh, it's easy to understand this. Like if you work a normal job, and let's say you're making, I don't know, 50,000 euros a year, um, you can walk into a bank and maybe they'll give you 200,000 or 300,000 euro loan to buy a house with, but they will not give you a $10 million loan. So like that kind of represents the the uh, the limitation to growth. And so once you reach those limitations, the only way you can get new collateral into the system, well, absent new technologies, new discoveries that increase the productivity of the system, or you discover new fine, gold, silver, things like this. Absent that, you have to go abroad in search for collateral in other countries. So you end up colonizing everywhere. Oh, look, here, the Middle East has a lot of oil. We go there. Oh, look, the Caribbean countries, we can grow sugar and tobacco and coffee there. So we colonize there. Oh, look, South America, loads of silver and arable land. And so it's been going everywhere like this. And it's in this incentive that basically uh, gets the most aggressive, most adventurous, most ruthless people to push it out forward. When the Spaniards discovered South America, and they realized that they're loaded with gold and silver, then you had posters all over Spain encouraging young men to go and seek their fortune across the ocean. And of course, anybody who was devoted to their family business, the farms, or manufacturers or whatever, and they were doing well, they were not moved by this. But anybody who was desperate and who wanted to change their life was tempted by this. And in a similar way, the same mechanism still operates today. Uh, bombing Iran. Why? Why? Well, they have a lot of oil. And trying to destroy Russia. Why? Because they have $75 trillion worth of natural resources. And if you could turn all that into collateral of Western banks, well, that's something. And so I think that the break with the 500 or 600 years worth of history will have to entail a complete overhaul of our money system, because money really should be tokenized expressions of social real savings. The real excess wealth that a society generates. And then once you have that and you tokenize it in whatever form, then you can distribute it, or you can allocate it to investments, whatever, cathedrals, pyramids, space travel, or just, spending for lifestyle reasons. But as it is, yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead.
No, no, and you mentioned Spain back in the day, like when they discovered all the silver in the New World, well, New World. They actually went bankrupt many times because, like you said, probably a lot of people went abroad, young men, to get their riches, and they neglected the Spanish economy. So it can have a negative impact. And it seems like right now in the West, we've done the same thing because we have a lot of debt, but all the production is gone to like global South country, it seems. So we're going down the same path of Spain.
Yeah, but it was even worse than that. It's not only that parts of Spanish economy got neglected in favor of search for gold. It's also that most of the gold and silver in the end accrued to the bankers, because all these adventures across the oceans were funded by Italian and German bankers, and they they had already money markets in Amsterdam, and a lot of this gold ended up kind of diffused across Europe. It was financialized into these into bonds. Uh, Somehow the Spanish crown, the Spanish royal house ended up in debt, in massive debt, rather than being very wealthy and being Europe's creditor, because the whole thing was run by the banking elites. And well, banking oligarchies are in charge of our societies today, which is why we have almost a chronic condition of mayhem abroad and misery at home everywhere, which is insane when you think about it, because our societies are absolutely enormously productive. It's insane how productive we are, but people are making it harder. People are finding it harder and harder to make ends meet.
Yeah, it's
It
like
just
we've got like slaves have chains around their legs and a weight. It's like
Yes.
that's what this system does to people, and like you said, and because we shouldn't be there shouldn't be any want in the world. I'm not saying I believe in wealth distribution, but I think the system sucks a lot of the wealth from the many to the few, like the bankers, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But the thing that Japan has just done, and I think that they will be distributing something like $1,000 to every Japanese person or grown up. I don't know exactly. That actually makes sense. That makes good sense. It is a form of distribution of wealth, but I say why not? Because you could live in a society where everybody gets $1,000 to spend. Um, because those who are industrious and creative and entrepreneurial, they will still be better off. But the fact that every last person has money to spend is actually a good thing, because rather than having a country flooded by homeless people who are a public menace on the city streets, you could have if you're an entrepreneur, you could have clients. If they have money to spend, they can buy stuff. So if you're a businessman, it's easier to sell to people who have money to spend than to sell to the homeless people who are lining the streets of your cities. And so it does make sense. And then at any rate, we have distribution of wealth anyway, as it is. It's just that, unlike the Japanese model, it's going to the big pharma and military industrial complex and big agriculture and big tech and so forth. They're getting hundreds of billions in subsidies every year, and nobody cares. But if, God forbid, the proverbial welfare queen makes $1,000 a month, then everybody loses their mind.
Yeah, so how do you think things will evolve? Where do you think we could go? And what would be the best outcome? Like, if this system of this debt-based system collapses, yeah, I guess that's a tough question, right? It depends on what people do as individuals, right?
I think that money will have to be democratized in a number of ways. First of all, it'll have to represent the real social surplus, social savings. Uh, okay, you can spend, you can you can create purchasing power through debt, but it would have to be kind of a democratic process, in the sense that uh, people who live in a society should decide how new money should be allocated to what uses. And I'm going to guess they're not going to vote for permanent wars. They're not going to be voting for digital IDs and CBDCs and universal vaccinations with periodic boosters and stuff like that. They will vote for clean streets, nice libraries, parks, schools, good healthcare, and stuff like that. So I think that's essential. How do you achieve that? I think that given today's technologies, that should be easily achievable, and you could even whatever social surplus is distributed to the population, you could attract it to investment projects through crowdsourcing platforms. So let's say if I get $1,000 in the mail every month, I can go and spend it. I can buy drugs and alcohol and do that, or I can go to a crowdsourcing platform and see where I want to invest my money for the future. And so maybe somebody is going to want to build a fleet of fishing boats, and maybe I want to have some action in the fishing fleet, so I can fund that. Or maybe somebody will decide, hey, I want to build a cathedral in our town, and maybe I want to contribute to that. And so I think in that sense, you can give people the choice what to do with their money, and then people who can make the best case about why their project makes sense will do well. And in this sense, I think we have one beautiful thing going for us, the thing that's called the wisdom of crowds. And that's the inverse of the madness of crowds. But generally, uh, ordinary people, when presented with true information, collectively tend to reach optimum answers and solutions to their problems. There's a lot of empirical evidence for that. Our problem has been that we have been under an oligarchy of a very small clique of people who have um, created a matrix and then passed it from generation to generation within the same families, and they have very different agendas from ordinary people. We've come to the point where they regard us all as hackable animals, and who want to have like a hermetic control over everybody. They want to force CBDCs on us so they can control every last expenditure that we make. We now know there are, robot vacuum cleaners are spying on us, that our cars are spying on us. Um, it really, in aggregate, it amounts to David Webb's great taking, and we have no choice but to push back. And so I think that if we do our homework, and we can, because we are the first generation with this insane thing called the internet and AI, then we will push for a radical reform of the monetary system. And if we're successful in this, and I think we must be, that's not even a choice, then I think that the story of humanity changes very, very radically. And I know that there are teams of very qualified people in Russia and in China who have been pondering this problem for many, many years now, because they understand that if we want to transcend the condition of permanent wars, we have to change the money system. And they've been engineering new money systems from the future. So whatever solutions they came up with will probably become available to everyone, because it's in their system also to not have rabid pathogenic civilizations on their doorstep, like a warmongering Sparta in your neighborhood. Nobody wants that.
Wow, that was great. And hopefully this war in Iran will be the last one for these psychopathic or whatever you call them, bankers. As the saying goes, all wars are bankers' wars. And yeah, in the meantime, like you said, we have to keep trying to inform the public how nefarious and fraudulent this that base system is.
Yes, and I think it may be not as difficult as it seems. Because one thing that we learned from the 2000 and no 1980s SNL crisis is that most bankers are actually honest people, and that if you create banking as a public utility, as was done in Germany, for example, well, almost, you had thousands of small local and regional banks that funded local and regional businesses, and they were non-profit institutions, and that they were actually the engine of German economic success. Like the invisible energizer battery behind German economic success. If you do that, then you've practically won half the battle already.
Yeah.
The problem is that, banking fraud and ruthless, aggressive behavior in banking in most of the Western nations is not only not sanctioned, it's encouraged. Well, the bankers profit and they never face any punishment, so complete and total impunity. And so that then rewards and empowers the bad players, and it penalizes and eventually uh, mm, ruins the good players. So it could be as simple as removing those incentives out of the game and making sure that the bankers have to be accountable to society. In China, banking fraud is often punished by death. They drag the bankers in front of a firing squad, and that used to be done in Europe in the Middle Ages. If bankers destroyed their communities, they were given a chance to redress, to repay their victims, and if they were unable, then they would get beheaded.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
that's
I agree with you because I saw something the other day on YouTube about how the US banking system prior to 1863, I think, before they brought in the national banking law, um, that it used to be free banking and you had thousands of banks, like local banks, that lent to the local community. And then the excuse eventually was from the big Northeast New York banks was that it was too messy. But in Germany as well, I think Richard Werner has spoken about how Germany has a lot of lenders banks and like community banks, and it's much easier, if you have a local bank in your town, they will know what local businesses do. But here in the UK, we've only got four or five big banks. And I don't know if you heard of the Bank of Dave. It was a guy a few years ago who tried to open his own little bank in a town up north, in a city up north, and they never gave him the license because they don't want that. So yeah, I agree with you. Like you said, I don't think most bankers are like evil. I think the people who control the big banks are.
Yeah, yeah, correct. And the problem is that uh, they 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 set up a rigged game where they always win.
Yeah.
And if you're honest and scrupulous, then you end up being disadvantaged systematically, and then eventually they eliminate you from the game, and the worst of the worst end up climbing to the top. But this this situation existed in Russia in the 1990s. And then Vladimir Putin basically overturned it, and he, at one point very early into his presidency, um, he lined up all his oligarchs and said, "New sheriff in town, new rules of the game." And in the end, these oligarchs, they're still around. They're still extremely wealthy. They get to enjoy their life and profit from their enterprises, but they no longer control the political process. And that was the whole thing. Whereas in Europe, the oligarchs do control the political process. And so that's the thing that we have to overturn, that we'll have to overturn. Otherwise, Otherwise, our future in Europe is the same destination as the Western Roman Empire, which means a complete devastation of everything, dark ages.
Oh, Alex, I guess we could keep talking for a lot longer, but we have to end it somewhere. Maybe we'll continue another day. It was great to speak with you, and all the best.
Thank you for the invite, Mario. Always good to join you, and until the next time.
Till the next time.